Today we're reviewing a car that is pretty exciting. It's a hatchback, which potentially one of the most diverse cars on the market, but it's also one of the most stylish ones, the Opel Astra. But it's not just any Astra, it's the fully electric one. And in this review, we're going to be taking a deep dive into everything from prices to what it's like to drive, and of course, the all-important range and electrical figures. In terms of design and spec, well, it is very similar to the normal Astra. So you get that iconic visor grille, the shark fin on the bonnet, and a few other little features here and there. This colour, Voltaic Blue, and it is gorgeous. It's about a €900 option, but potentially worth speccing. And then onto spec, you get your usual SE, Elegance and GS, and naturally the cars get a little bit prettier the higher up you go, but you also get more features, higher spec and a lot more tech. What I will say is, if it comes to choosing that spec, maybe go down to your local Opel dealer and they'll hopefully be able to give you a little bit more advice than I can. If you want to find that, then you can hit the link up there. But let's talk about electricity. So the Astra is powered by a 54 kilowatt hour battery, and that energy then goes to a 115 kilowatt electric motor, which then drives the wheels. Now, in terms of range, well, actually the WLTP range is about 416 kilometers. Truth be told, when I collected it, it had 422 kilometers. So it is actually pretty good in the real world. You should be able to get over 400. I certainly will. On top of that, in terms of fast charging, it's got 100 kilowatt fast charging. Now that sounds very nerdy and boring, but that means that at a fast charger, you should be able to go from about 10 to 80% in about 25 to 30 minutes, which is very respectable. We'll also talk about efficiency when we go for a drive later, because it's very efficient. So to drive, well, the first thing I'm going to notice is that you have to turn it on. I know that sounds weird, but in something like an ID3, you just get in and go, and then to pull in gear, you just pull it back there and off you set. And it's very quiet, really calm. A lot of electric cars, if you've never driven one, really instill this kind of calm nature to them because they don't make much noise. There's not much road noise even. In fact, as you drive this, even on a motorway, it's blissfully calm. And the only thing I will say is, the other day I was driving at about 35, 40 kilometers per hour, and the passenger window was open and I could kind of hear it vibrating a little bit. But as a whole, really nice. Now, I want to talk about a couple things when you come to drive. The first is there's obviously different modes, everything from eco, normal and sport. And believe it or not, in each different mode, you get different amounts of power. So that electric motor, it produces about 156 brake horsepower. But to get all that, you have to have it in sport mode. And when it's in sport mode, it's actually a bit of an animal. A little bit of a hot hatch in here. It's quite grippy on the road. The handling's pretty nice, well weighted, and it is fairly well composed. Put it in normal mode, which is where it'll spend 90% of its life, and it's a lot more calm to drive and just easy. And actually, eco mode is really good. You find yourself being able to use the entire length of the throttle, which I quite like because you feel like you're getting more out of the car and you're not burning through the juice. Speaking of burning through the juice, another thing is this B mode, and that is braking mode, regenerative braking, which means when you take your foot off the accelerator, it slows down. Now, here in this electric Astra, it won't actually come to a full halt like some other cars do, and actually it's not that aggressive compared to some of the other cars on the market, even like an ID3. However, it will still mean that most of your driving is done without having to touch the brake pedal, which does make life a lot easier. As you'd expect, it has a plethora, as they say, of tech and driving aids. Everything down from lane keep when you're on motorways to adaptive cruise control. And actually it has speed sign recognition. And this one I quite like, particularly because it comes up, it will tell you what the speed limit is on the motorway, and then if you click OK, it will just set your cruise control to that, which is quite nice. However, I will say, I was on the M3 the other day, and it told me that the speed limit was 130 kilometers per hour. And as far as I know, last time I checked, we don't have speed limits of 130 kilometers per hour. So would it have been Opel's fault if I'd got done for speeding? And then lastly, I do want to talk about driving this in tight spots. It's fantastic. The turning circle is absolutely bonkers. It really can nip around in any tight spot, and the overhead 360 camera that this car has is phenomenal. It just means you can get nice and close to curves without damaging those lovely black alloys. So let's talk about money. And believe it or not, the Astra is actually about 2,000 euros cheaper than a Volkswagen Golf. So they come in at about 30,000 euros, and I know a lot of people will be financing one. So in terms of a PCP with about a 9,000 euro deposit, you're talking 310 euro a month. So pretty reasonable on that standpoint. However, with the electric side of things, naturally prices go up quite a bit. So they start at about 39,000 euros. However, for the 242 offers, Opel have actually slashed the price a little bit. So this car, as it stands, as you see it today, is a touch under 39,000 euros, which when you consider that it's got over 400 kilometer range in the real world, that it's very stylish, it's got plenty of spec, that's actually pretty reasonable value in the electric car world. And what's more is, compared to an identical diesel version, it's actually about 2,800 euros cheaper. In terms of the interior, well, it is very similar to the ordinary Opel Astra, which we have reviewed, so hit the link up there and that will give you a little bit of an insight into it. However, I have driven back to back the diesel Sports Tour Astra and now this electric one. So I spent a bit of time and a couple of things I've noticed and also some differences. First of all, every now and then the Apple CarPlay system becomes quite buggy. It is wireless, but sometimes it just doesn't work. My phone just won't connect, or it will lag when you're using Google Maps. But that is probably 1 in 20 times. Another thing that I've noticed is down here, and I'm nearly sure this wasn't on the diesel one, there's a little bit of a lump, and I think that must be for a battery or something, and it might also explain why there's not much space underneath the driver's seat for rear passengers. Another thing I also noticed, in here, this component is not as deep as it was in the diesel last week. I don't know if they're storing batteries down there or what it is, but it is something that I have observed. It still has those AGR seats, which are not only comfortable, but also good for your posture on long drives. The idea is they customize in about 10 different ways. And other than that, it is identical to the regular Astra, which is a very good thing. In terms of space in the rear, there's not exactly an abundance of it. This is my driving position, and as much as I don't want to admit it, I'm not the tallest person in the world. And it's actually quite restrictive in the knees, but more so actually my feet barely fit underneath it. This headrest too plays a role, so you have to have it in the up position. Now that is for a full grown adult, emphasis on the fully grown. But for younger children, it's actually probably perfectly spaced back here, and the ISOFIX points are really easy accessible. And that's about everything you have other than the USB-C charging point and some air vents there. And then there's also 2 cup holders here in the folding armrest, and that's actually a ski hatch through to the rear. So in the boot of the Astra, well, generally speaking, the normal Astra with a petrol engine, 422 litres of boot, which is bigger than a Volkswagen Golf and than a Ford Focus. However, if you decide to go for the electric one, it reduces to 352 litres, which is definitely not that big. However, it is pretty easily accessible. There's very little load lip. The seats do fold down, however, you have to walk around or else reach in really uncomfortably. But as a whole, it's quite a nice boot. Now, there is no spare wheel under here. However, for 121 euro, you can spec a space saver wheel. Personally speaking, I think it's definitely worth doing. However, I'm not entirely sure you can do that with an electric version. So that is another question for your dealer when you go down to visit. So as a whole, the electric Astra, it ticks a lot of boxes. It's got a very respectable range. It's very comfortable. It handles the road quite well. It's got plenty of tech, and most importantly, it looks gorgeous. I've said it since I first laid my eyes on it. I think this blue is gorgeous. I also think the red is really nice, and it's just a lovely car with lots of presence. But what I love most about it is Opel have taken a very different strategy than the likes of Volkswagen. So where they went and they built a whole new chassis and this whole new design, Opel have said, no, we're going to stick to the old chassis. We're going to put an electric motor and some batteries into it. And one thing I love about that is, in a world where there's a lot of kind of hate towards electric cars, no one knows this is electric. As I pull in to my local shop, people just think I've bought a nice Opel Astra. And I've got a few compliments on it, but no one's asked me, is it electric? Because it doesn't stand out, and that I adore. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed this review. If you have, then please make sure to subscribe. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next one.